How did a 20-year-old young woman who dreamed of becoming a teacher become one of the deadliest snipers of World War II, known to the Nazis as the Invisible Witch? The story begins on January 7, 1944. In the frozen forests of Belarus, the temperature is 18 degrees below zero. A German patrol advances in silence, feeling safe in the vast whiteness. But they are not alone. A shot. Dry, precise. The soldier in front falls. Before they could react, a second shot. Panic sets in. Where did the shots come from? The snow, which had been a protective blanket before, is now a shroud of death. Hidden among the trees, with a fixed gaze and controlled breathing, is Roza Shanina. Her weapon is the Mosin Nagant M9130. With it, Roza executes her signature move, the doublet. 2 shots in rapid succession. The first incapacitates, the second confirms. To the Soviets, a heroine. To the Germans, a ghost. But behind the sniper was a tormented young woman. In her diary she wrote, "I killed a man, and they told me I killed a fascist, but to me, he remains a man." This is the story of the defender of her country and the prisoner of her own conscience. To understand who Roza Shanina was, we need to go back to a place where the cold shapes souls. She was born on April 3, 1924, in the village of Idima, in northern Soviet Union. A place of harsh winters and deep silence, where life was a daily lesson in resilience. Her father, a veteran of the First World War, and her mother, a dedicated teacher, raised 8 children in a wooden house that creaked under the weight of the ice. Discipline began early. To go to school, Roza walked 8 kilometers a day, crossing frozen rivers and blizzards. At age 14, driven by an unusual thirst for knowledge, she left her family and moved alone to the city of Arkhangelsk to continue her studies. She worked as a babysitter, studied at night, and learned to be independent in a world that was growing ever darker. A colleague later wrote, "Roza never accepted that something was impossible. For her, discipline solved everything." That determination would be tested on June 22, 1941. Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. The war, which had seemed distant before, was now at the door. For Roza, the blow was personal and devastating. Her brother, Mikhail, who served in the Red Army, died during the brutal Siege of Leningrad. The news arrived in an official letter, short and cold. At that moment, the 17-year-old girl who dreamed of books made a silent promise of revenge. She tried to enlist several times, but was rejected for being a woman and underage. "Your place is in the rear," the officer said. But Roza was not the type to accept a no. While helping care for war wounded, she saw the horror up close: mutilations, hunger, orphans. Her pain turned into purpose. That's when she learned about the creation of the Central Women's Sniper Training School, a pioneering project on the outskirts of Moscow. It was her chance. She boarded a military train, crossing a country in ruins. The journey was long, but her determination was greater. Upon arriving in Moscow, she faced bureaucracy and disbelief until she was finally accepted. In her diary, she wrote, "Tomorrow I learned to shoot. Today I stop waiting." The harsh childhood in Arkhangelsk had not been in vain. Unknown to her, she had already trained what every sniper needs: patience, focus, and an incredible ability to endure the cold. The girl from the north was ready. The Central Women's Sniper Training School at Podolsk was a place forged by the urgency of war. Hundreds of young women, most orphans or with relatives killed on the front, were subjected to a brutal routine. They woke up at 5 in the morning, crawled through frozen mud, and studied ballistics under the supervision of Stalingrad veterans. The order was clear: you need to shoot as if the world depends on it. Because it does. Roza Shanina stood out immediately. Her calm was her greatest weapon. While other recruits grew frustrated, she practiced breath control, studied firing angles, and disassembled her Mosin Nagant rifle until she knew it like the back of her hand. The instructors noticed her almost supernatural precision, hitting targets at 600 meters with frightening consistency. Her classmates called her the girl from the north, a reserved young woman who spoke little but whose determination was unquestionable. The 7-month training was inhuman. They learned to camouflage themselves, move like ghosts, and wait for hours, motionless, before firing a single shot. In April 1944, Roza graduated with honors. Her file described her as a soldier with remarkable psychological balance and unquestionable courage. At 20 years old, she was sent to the 184th Rifle Division on the front lines in Belarus. Her arrival was met with suspicion. The battle-hardened veteran soldiers doubted the young woman with the serene face. "Do you know how to shoot, girl?" one asked, in a mocking tone. Roza replied without hesitation, "Enough so you don't need to." That response proved prophetic days later. In her first combat, she eliminated a German observer from nearly 400 meters away. Total silence. The suspicion turned to respect.
It was the first of many kills. The presence of Roza and other snipers boosted the troops' morale. In just a few weeks, she became a legendary figure. But the reality of combat was very different from the glory of propaganda. After her first wartime shot, she wrote in her diary, "I killed a man." The observer beside her corrected, "You killed a fascist." That phrase would echo in her mind for the rest of her life, marking the invisible boundary between duty and guilt. The young woman who loved books was now learning to live with the sound of weapons. Between April and May 1944, Roza Shanina became a name whispered with reverence on the Belarusian front. In just a few weeks, she accumulated dozens of confirmed kills, operating almost always alone, a white shadow moving through the devastated landscape. Her precision was so remarkable that commanders awarded her the Order of Glory, one of the Soviet Union's highest decorations for bravery. She was the first woman in her division to receive it. The ceremony was brief. While the soldiers applauded, Roza remained serious, her gaze distant. For her, the medals represented not glory, but survival. At night, in her diary, she vented the anguish that consumed her. "I'm getting good at something I hate doing." That duality defined her existence, the lethal sniper by day, the young woman haunted by guilt by night. Her fame inevitably attracted the attention of Soviet propaganda. The army's official newspaper, Krasnaya Zvezda, began publishing photos and stories about the daughter of the North. The headlines described her as a heroine with eagle eyes, a symbol of patriotic resistance. The country needed heroes, and Roza fit the role perfectly. But the public image contrasted violently with the reality she lived. While the newspaper showed a smiling and confident soldier, her diary revealed exhaustion, fear, and longing for home. "If I survive, I want to teach children so they don't need weapons," she wrote in July. For Roza, the war was not an adventure, but a terrible routine. "The war turned fear into routine," she noted. Her words, sincere and painful, showed the true face of heroism, not the absence of fear, but the courage to continue despite it. She accepted her role as a symbol in silence, understanding that her story inspired other women to enlist. But deep down, she rejected the legend. In a letter to her mother, she asked, "I don't want to be remembered as someone who killed, but as someone who tried to protect." While Soviet propaganda shaped the image of the guardian of the snow, Roza's diary kept the truth of a soul struggling not to get lost amid the chaos. In June 1944, the Red Army launched Operation Bagration, one of the largest and most decisive offensives of the entire Second World War. The objective was clear: crush the German Army Group's center and liberate Belarus. More than 2 million Soviet soldiers advanced on enemy lines, and in the midst of that human tide was Roza Shanina, now a key piece in the vanguard. Her role was lethal and surgical. Infiltrating ahead of the rifle units, she had the mission to eliminate observers, officers, and machine gunners before they could halt the Soviet advance. Her doublet technique became her deadly signature. Dressed in camouflage gear, she disappeared into the landscape, using the shadows of ruins and the silence of the forest as her allies. Frontline reports mention kills made from over 400 meters away, in chaotic combat conditions and with almost no visibility. During the fierce battle for the city of Vitebsk, Roza operated for more than 72 hours without rest, protecting the troops' flanks and saving countless comrades with her precise shots. Her superiors described her as a sniper with exceptional coolness. The effectiveness of Roza and other female shooters began to have a profound psychological impact on the enemy. Captured German reports began mentioning inexplicable casualties. One document described attacks by an invisible target that fired double shots from an uncertain direction and then vanished without a trace. Fear spread through the German trenches. The soldiers began calling this ghostly threat Die unsichtbare Hexe, the invisible witch. The mere sound of 2 quick shots was enough to paralyze a patrol. Some German units even altered their routes to avoid areas where her presence was suspected.
Among the Soviets, Roza's legend grew every day. Officers cited her in motivational speeches, and her calm in the face of danger became an example for all. "She is calm like the snow," one commander said, "and as dangerous as the thaw." However, fame brought additional weight. The more they exalted her, the more isolated she felt. In her diary, she confessed the exhaustion behind the heroine facade. "They talk about me as if I feel nothing, but every shot has a name." The invisible witch, feared by enemies and revered by allies, was deep down a 20-year-old young woman who dreamed of the war's end. On the frozen front, she no longer needed to appear to be felt. She just needed to exist. In September 1944, after months of uninterrupted combat, Roza Shanina received a brief and rare leave. The journey back to her hometown village of Edima was a trip through a country she barely recognized. Train stations were destroyed, and the cars were packed with wounded and refugees. Upon arriving, she found her mother at the door of the house, wearing the same apron from before the war. The reunion was silent, for words could no longer describe the abyss the war had created. During the few days she spent at home, Roza seemed like a stranger in her own past. She visited the frozen river where she used to play and spent hours staring at the white horizon, as if searching for something she had lost forever. Before leaving, she left her medals, including the Order of Glory, with her mother, saying they belonged to the family, not the war. To her younger brother, she reportedly said in a low voice, "I don't know if I'll come back." The premonition of death accompanied her in every gesture. Despite a shoulder wound, she refused the medical recommendation to extend her leave. "If I can walk, I can shoot," she replied to the officer. In her diary, she tried to explain that urgency. "There's something inside me that doesn't know how to rest while others are still fighting." It was the feeling that drove an entire generation to march toward the end of the war, no matter the cost. The hug with her mother was the last. "If I don't come back," she said, "look for me in the snow." In January 1945, Roza was sent to the final offensive in East Prussia. It was the heart of enemy territory, and German resistance was fanatical. The fighting no longer took place in forests, but in destroyed villages and fields of ruins. The Soviet advance was relentless, but the cost in lives was terrible. Roza, now acting as leader of small sniper groups, was at the center of the inferno. In one of her last letters, she wrote, "Here the sound of the rifle mixes with the cries of those who still resist." Exhausted and surrounded by death, she refused to retreat. She felt her place was beside her comrades until the end. On January 27, 1945, during a brutal battle on the banks of the Lava River, German artillery fell heavily on Soviet positions. Roza saw an artillery commander seriously wounded in the open field. Without hesitation, she ran to rescue him. It was at that moment that a mortar shard struck her in the chest. The final act of the invisible witch was not a shot, but an act of compassion.
Severely wounded, Roza Shanina still tried to get up, dragging herself toward the officer she wanted to save. Comrades rushed to help her, but the wound was fatal. Her last words, according to witnesses, were not about herself, but about the man lying beside her. He can still live. She died a few hours later, on January 28, 1945. She was only 20 years old. She was buried right there, under a snow-covered pear tree in an improvised grave, marked by a helmet. There was no ceremony, only the silent respect of soldiers who had lost one of their greatest legends. The official news of her death, published days later in the newspaper Krasnaya Zvezda, was short and bureaucratic, omitting the heroic act that led to her death. The regime preferred the image of the relentless sniper to that of the compassionate woman. Her body was never exhumed. It remains to this day in the land where she fell. With the end of the war, Roza Shanina's story, like so many others, began to fade, known only to veterans and military historians. Her name was included on the list of frontline heroes, but the person behind the legend was getting lost in time. Everything changed in 1965, almost 20 years later. A history teacher from Arkhangelsk, researching forgotten military archives, found a small, worn-covered notebook. It was Roza Shanina's diary.
The publication of excerpts from the diary caused a stir in the Soviet Union. The yellowed pages revealed a truth that wartime propaganda never told. There was no steel heroine, but a sensitive and intelligent young woman who reflected on ethics, love, and the weight of her actions. In her notes, Roza spoke little about her 59 confirmed kills and much about the feelings that haunted her. "I'm a girl who loved the sound of the river and now only hears the sound of weapons," she wrote. In another passage, she revealed, "Today they applauded me for surviving." The diary humanized the statue. It showed that true heroism lies not in the absence of feelings, but in the ability to continue despite them. The document, now preserved in the Arkhangelsk Regional Museum, transformed the perception of Roza, revealing that the thinking sniper was much more complex and fascinating than the legend that surrounded her. Amid shots and silences, Roza Shanina's diary continues to say what the war tried to silence. That courage and sensitivity can, yes, inhabit the same heart. After the rediscovery of her diary, Roza Shanina's legacy was completely redefined. She ceased to be just the relentless sniper of propaganda and became one of the most human and complex symbols of women's participation in World War II. Her story began to be told not just in terms of kills, but in terms of moral courage. Starting in the 1980s, on the 40th anniversary of the Soviet victory, her trajectory gained national prominence. Streets, schools, and monuments in cities like Arkhangelsk and Moscow were named after her. The government officially recognized her combat record, but what truly captured the imagination were the words from her diary. The young woman who questioned the very war she fought became more inspiring than the killing machine that propaganda had created. Books, documentaries, and academic articles began to explore the duality of her life. Historians today describe her as the thinking sniper, a figure who unites military duty with compassion and ethical reflection. She represents a generation of Soviet women who not only took up arms out of revenge or duty, but fought to keep their humanity intact in a dehumanized world. The image that endures is not that of the smiling heroine from pamphlets, but of the young woman who, amid hell, found time to worry about the fate of a wounded enemy and to dream of a future where children wouldn't need weapons. Today, a bronze statue of Roza Shanina can be seen in her hometown. She is not in an aggressive pose, but kneeling, with her rifle resting, her gaze serene and thoughtful. It is the perfect representation of her legacy, the strength that does not reside in fury, but in calm, the courage that is not in killing, but in protecting, and the memory that does not fade with time. The cold that shaped her was never forgetfulness, it was permanence.
Roza Shanina did not live to see the victory, but she conquered time, proving that silent courage is, in the end, the one that resonates most through history.